All right, Renee, I think that's
it's me then. Okay. So I'd like to call to order the special meeting of the Public Safety Committee on November 30th at 4 in the afternoon. And I think, do we call roll?
All right. Got Vice Mayor Watkins, Camille Lee. Councilmember Golder.
Present.
Councilmember Cummings.
Here.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so I think the only item on our agenda is the update on the work plan.
Right before we do that.
We have to do oral communication. Sorry, I just pulled up the agenda. Is there anybody in the audience for oral communications? Let's see. Attendees. Okay, so oral communications. And I don't have a script, so I think you push *6 to unmute. If you want to raise, or was it *9 to raise your hand?
It doesn't look like there's anyone raising.
There's 2 attendees.
But no hands raised.
No hands are raised. Okay. So with that, then we're going to move on to general business, and we only have one item on our agenda. It's the Public Safety Committee work plan, and we will revisit, discuss, prioritize the city's Public Safety Committee's latest work plan.
All right.
And so I'm going to turn it over to you, Em, for that. Thank you.
All right. Can you all see that?
Yes, and I can see that Martine just logged in as well, so
Wonderful.
We can mark her as present, and I'll turn the facilitation back over to her after your presentation. Thank you.
Of course, thank you so much. All right, so just want to provide a quick recap. During our meeting for the Public Safety Committee, we met in late September. And one of the items that PSC had recommended was for staff to look into the most current work plan. And so we did look into that, and the latest one that we had found was in January of 2020. So I did put together a quick kind of like a timeline as a refresher of what's been done in relating to the work plan. And June 2021, there were 3 items that were, discussed at the PSC meeting. And reports were received. The first one was the assembly and disassembly of storage of bicycle parts on public rights-of-way. The second items that were reported was hypodermic needles in highly sensitive areas. And then the third piece was the restorative justice pilot program. And then I believe there were some staff changes that happened during this time and then picked back up in January of 2022 for fiscal year. And then that's when staff had introduced a 6-work plan draft. And to my understanding, staff was temporarily there for 6 months, hence to why it was not your traditional annual work plan. And then there were some staff changes again. So here we are, as we met in September, we're bringing this item back to kind of revisit what that's going to look like. Is the priority still the same? Are there any sort of, updates, feedback that we need to kind of, work on so that I can, make those updates to kind of reflect that? And that's the hope for today's meeting. So I'm going to pause here and see if anyone has any questions or comments on this page. No? Okay, great. All right. So I went through all the documents and I found, a recap of the June 30th minutes. So this was kind of like the highlight of the 3 topics that was presented to PSC. So most of them, there were just reports that were received. 2 of these items, but it looked like there was a future request. So I made a note on the bottom. Again, there are changes in staff, so I may not know what has happened in between, but if the members here today do know what has, if there were any updates to, let us know so we're all on the same page. So the future request for the assembly and disassembly bicycle, the feedback was to provide some sort of outreach plan for the bike shop, as well as the hypodermic needles, to also provide some sort of outreach plan as well. So that was kind of like the last update. But since then, I haven't really found any sort of material since then. Then for the January 31st minutes, the staff had presented the 6-month work plan draft, and it looked like it was approved by staff with a friendly amendment by Councilmember Cummings. And it's to kind of look for additional opportunities for funding, programs, resources, and partnerships. And so that was the last thing that was presented then. So then, as I kind of dug a little further in terms of that, what that 6-month work plan looked like, it focused on these areas. And these were the items that came up, and then the status of next steps. So we're well past the deadline because that 6-month would have ended around July of this year. So hence why we're revisiting this and see if these are still the same priorities. Again, the assembly and disassembly of bicycles is on here, then the banning of hypodermic needles for pilot program and defining public safety was also on here. And then coming in the quality of life ordinance and surveillance ordinance. So does this look pretty accurate? Any questions or comments regarding these?
I'm trying to think about, because I was looking at the list that you had on the in the agenda packet.
Yep. So
yeah,
I was going to go to the next slide.
Okay.
So these are the pending topics that was in the staff report that hasn't been addressed and is not on the plan, but it is one of those things to revisit in the future. So those are the additional 4. And then I've also included, again, these are the recurring meeting updates, starting in 2023, where where departments will provide the updates in addition to whatever those topics are.
Thanks, Em, for piecing together our sort of broken sort of timelines in history. I think it really accurately covers what happened and sort of the reasons why there's been such a lack of follow through. And I think there was a lot of staff turnover and change ups. And unfortunately, we weren't able to move forward with a lot of things that we hoped to move forward with. So I appreciate that summary and history. I was wondering if either of our police or fire chiefs want to sort of share anything that they have, any sort of thoughts they have about this, and or thoughts about some of the proposed priority areas.
I can go first. Thanks, Chair Watkins and council members. So I've had some conversations with our new staff person in M in kind of the overarching concept of the Public Safety Committee. And as you know, I'm new as well. So you have staff turnover, you have COVID, you have a new police chief, a new fire chief. And so I've been really actually having the conversation with her about, what's kind of the defined purpose of the Public Safety Committee. And let's really look at it at a super high level first, to determine whether, what is the purpose? And I've been educated through the fact that there's no bylaws. You guys do, work plans. And so I think this is a great opportunity to kind of start clean slate. And if these are still the priorities and you find that this is what your purpose is, then that's our obligation to execute that. I know that the purpose, or at least one of the purposes, was to be involved in the Independent Auditor report. But the situation around that report has changed because the auditor now does a public presentation and would prefer one time in front of all of council. And before previously, that report was presented to this committee, I think in closed session. So that has even changed, and that needs to kind of be readdressed. And what is this committee's purpose around the audit report, which is now presented differently? So I guess that's a lot, is kind of just my thoughts over the last several weeks of having conversation with M about really figuring out what direction do we want to go. And here we are, the end of the calendar year, and Justin's moving on to bigger things, and so we have somebody new that's going to come in, and what are their priorities? So we're still in this period of do the priorities change come January with one additional member? So
Yeah,
I wasn't a part of a lot of these. Sorry, just one last part. I wasn't a part of a lot of these conversations or ideas that were brought forward. And so I do know that there was some conversations around them, but I don't have a lot of historical recollection to the conversations around these priorities that were established.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think one additional consideration that came to mind for me too, knowing that there is going to be transition, is the work that's already happening and underway with the strategic planning for the organization as a whole. And so at some point, I don't know, Em, if you've had that conversation with the city manager's office, but where there might be potential for alignment with the broader city strategic planning areas of focus and goals, and how this also is going to parallel and sort of augment and support in this area. But that's just something that also came to mind, knowing that we've had those conversations. And I see my colleagues have their hands up, so we'll start with you, Justin, and then go over to you, Councilmember Golder.
Yeah, I was just going to say, first, thanks for putting this together. But one of the things that I was a little confused when I saw the packet, because to Bernie's point, I kind of thought the conversation was going to be around us trying to redefine what the role of the Public Safety Committee was. That's what I remember from the last meeting, and maybe I'm wrong, and maybe this was, it was the priorities. But the reason why I thought that was because of the fact that I think we had been talking about, really trying to figure out what the role is, and the fact that there'd be new people coming in and not knowing who would be on the committee, not wanting to necessarily assign like what the next people will be working on, just knowing that depending on the makeup, they may want to change that. And so when I saw this today, that also came to mind again of, would it make sense to not take action on this? And really, if it's not on our agenda to have that conversation around kind of defining what the role of this group is, but if that could be the direction that's incorporated into something more along the lines of the new kind of strategic planning that the city manager's office is doing around the city as a whole, maybe that would make sense, just because, it seems like a lot's going to be changing, and with new staff all around and new council members coming in, the priorities can change. And some of this stuff is from, 2 councils ago. And I know that with the, for example, the quality of life ordinance and some of the hypodermic needle stuff and bike stuff that fits within that, and there's a few things that have been left out, that was something I know that Chief Mills was working on. And so since we have a new chief, doesn't make sense for us to keep going in that direction. So those are just some comments. I don't know how others feel, but I do resonate with Martine, what you're saying, and Bernie, what you're saying about, does it make sense for us to take action on all this with all the changes taking place? And would it make more sense to incorporate this into the broader kind of strategic planning and restructuring that's taking place?
That's a really great point, and that could also be a feedback that could bring back to staff if we could try to align this with the strategic plan instead of making that decision. So more of a feedback.
Thanks, Em. Councilmember Holder.
Yes, I agree with what you have said, Councilmember Cummings and Watkins and Chief Escalante. And I do see these as like safety issues that have been ongoing for decades, right? And so with the turnover, it probably will just be one new member of this committee. And I think we talked about one of the purposes of this committee is that there's 3 of us here that we can bring recommendations to council. I don't see it completely out of left field, to carry on with some of these things that I think, if anything, for me, sometimes government moves glacially slow. And so for example, the bikes, right? Like if there's something we can do before the new council, and I don't know, but I just, I don't want to see things kind of, if, like you said, some of these things were from 2 councils ago, maybe there's things that could be tweaked or whatever, but they're all relevant issues that are still happening in our community in regards to public safety. And I just, with the infrequency that we meet and the slow pace things move, I don't want to just keep postponing because there's always going to be a new council every 2 years. So that's my sentiment. That's it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I get it too, in terms of, just rolling up your sleeves and getting to work on some of this stuff too. Chief Escalante, I don't know if you have any sense of where things were. I know that there was some work already done specific to some of the ordinances. I don't know if we have a place to pick up from, or sort of where we would start if we were to kind of really try to hone in on a couple of things in the interim of kind of a broader work plan. I don't know if you want to speak to that, and then we'll have you go ahead, Justin.
Yeah, I think Justin might remember more than I do regarding the surveillance ordinance. I think he was involved in that. What I recall from the bicycle assembly and disassembly, I recall the city attorney's office doing some research on some ordinance, I believe, up in the Bay Area that has been used and so I think they weighed in on the legalities of it and provided maybe some recommendations. And then I think also the restorative justice program, I remember having conversations with former Chief Mills about his thoughts around that. And I will tell you, I had some concerns about what his vision was related to trying to hold people accountable, but the way he was thinking of it, I had some concerns. And so him and I had a lot of conversations around that. But that also is very, that includes obviously like the district attorney's office and many other entities in the community that I think is a little bit beyond our scope here, is my thought. And then I don't remember much around the hypodermic needles other than maybe increasing the ability or opportunity for people to properly dispose of them at parks. That was the biggest thing, I think, parks and beaches for the needles.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think since then, also particularly with the restorative justice, there's been the neighborhood courts that have come online and such like that. So anyways, Councilmember Cummings and then Goldberg.
Muted.
You're muted, Justin.
Yeah, sorry. I could provide a little bit more clarity too, because those mostly fit into quality of life. And so, to Chief Escalante's point, there's under that with the hypodermic needles, the idea was to have those banned in parks and beaches. And I think part of the controversy in that was if somebody needed them for, like if you're diabetic and you needed hypodermic needles for that. And then, yeah, to Bernie's point, the chop shop thing had come up a number of times in the assembly, the storage, and the prohibition of the assembly, disassembly, and the bike chop shop. Those were kind of combined, so those aren't mutually exclusive. And then, I remember the restorative justice piece was like if you got caught stealing something or what have you, or some misdemeanor crime, you could do public service and get it wiped off rather than having it sit on your record or something like that. But I think to Bernie's point, that does go beyond the scope of this committee and more, to probation and other departments. So, but all that's to say is that I think Councilmember Golder, to your point, we've been on this for 2 years now, and I think we were both hoping to work on a number of these items. And so I agree that if there's, a few things on here that fit within the scope of this committee that we can start getting moving, and then one other person comes on board, I don't see that as being, something that we should push off. And so, for example, bike chop shops, that's something that I've been hoping to work on for the past 4 years. And if that's something we could, resurrect and figure out how we could go forward with that, I'd be happy to see if we can bring that forward. And then I know that the open space patrols, I think that, Bernie, we'd want to lean on you because I know that staffing for PD has been an issue. But with the incident that happened involving Councilmember Golder's, I think it was her nephew or niece.
Yeah.
I know that was something that was important to her, and with more and more opening of the rail trails, I know that people are concerned with that as well. So, but yeah, for me, bike chop shops is definitely something that I'd be interested in seeing if we could kind of have some motion on. And then I'll just touch on the surveillance ordinance that was brought up when I first got on council, and we did take action on facial recognition technology and predictive policing when we addressed the policies after the murder of George Floyd. And I know that there's a lot of concern because the people who were interested in that item really wanted to have policies on all surveillance throughout the entire city, but that includes like video cameras at parking lots. And, and I know that they're interested in things like stingrays and license plate readers, but it's much, much broader than that. And I think at the time when that was brought up, city staff was saying that would be a huge lift to go through all the types of surveillance that we have and have to create policy on every single type. So I think that's probably something that would fall to the less important category at this moment in time, just given staffing and resources and priorities that I think other members of the council have.
Yeah, I appreciate your perspective. And then I'll go to you, Councilmember Golder. And I know that you're kind of moving into the policy scoring sheet, which I love, by the way, as a policy person. Thank you for that. And I like the idea of honing in to just do a couple things and get them done. So the idea of moving forward with some specific direction, like the bike chop shops and policy, I feels good to me, while simultaneously looking at the broader picture and the alignment to the work we're doing with the broader strategic plan. And then I would love your thoughts also on this, Councilmember Golder.
So I agree again, but I wanted to say, I think in regards, and I think all of us have been on since that March 2020, when I think all of us I've been doing public safety since we got on. And so I remember some of these, but I think for the needles, it was in regards to distribution of needles in those highly sensitive areas, not possession. I think that's what it was. And if I remember correctly. And then for bikes and chop shops, do we really have to make policy? Isn't it common sense that someone shouldn't be dismantling? Isn't there already some sort of, I'm asking you, Bernie, can't you just give direction to the officers? If someone's dismantled, no, these don't belong to you. We know they're stolen. It just defies logic to me that we'd even have to draft policy. It seems like you don't see that happening in other parts of the country or even the state necessarily. What can we do aside from, I don't know if it's a ridiculous question, but is there something we can do aside from making policy?
Well, I understand how we could probably assume some of these bikes, if not all of them, are potentially stolen. But we in law enforcement can't come to that assumption, unfortunately. And then even if we were to make a legal contact with somebody, even if it's a consensual contact, we, you know, and we want to run the serial number of the bike, that really the challenge is did somebody report the bike stolen and have their serial number to provide us to enter into the system at the time. So, yeah, just somebody out in public, in a public space, you know, dismantling a bike or fixing a bike is not, you know, in itself illegal. Mm-hmm. Now, if it's 4 a.m. and they're at, you know, a bike lock and they're removing the front tire, that's a little different. That rises to the level of reasonable suspicion and allows us to detain and investigate the situation. So it really does all depend. I think what the purpose, if I remember, was really some of the public locations, mostly in our open spaces where people had, you know, dozens of bikes and bike frames and different bike parts. I think that was really the purpose, not just working on one bike or 2 bikes, you know, in public space.
Well, it's just the rate in which bikes are stolen, you know, and I don't know if, you know, addressing the chop shops would address them being stolen, but like that's really the root of the issue, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, and I think this kind of goes back, that leads me a little bit back into just finding the overarching role of this committee, because this is really getting into the weeds, right? And let's be honest, okay, if there was an ordinance and we go and we cite somebody for it, does that have consequences that are going to change the behavior? And I think that's where we're looking at, like trying to be more of a, you know, how do we prevent crime and create more public safety? Maybe the role is, just as an idea, is maybe the role is working more on a program to increase the registration and identification of serial numbers before somebody leaves a bike shop when they buy a bike, right? We have that sort of bike registration program. Now, maybe we need to do a better job at advertising it or getting it out there, right? And maybe that allows us to create a little bit more overarching public safety versus citing those that are collecting what are probably stolen frames, but we may not be able to prove it because nobody's reported it stolen. Mm-hmm. Just a thought, right? You're just thinking kind of at a different level than getting down into the actual enforcement of the municipal ordinances. You know, it's just a thought.
I don't want to cut you off, Renee. Go ahead, please.
Me?
Yes.
No, I was just going to say I like that idea. I think that's a great idea. And then making it easier to report, whatever way we can make it easy to report when your bike is stolen. And
yeah,
there's a trail. Like, you're right. Maybe that is. Yeah, I do agree that we're getting into the weeds too.
No, and I think it is helpful to think about too, like technology that's changed. Like I know that people put the Apple tracker things now on their bikes. And, you know, I don't know what it is that we want to encourage around monitoring and managing people who have bikes and not getting them stolen and getting them back to their owner, if that's the case and if that's part of the solution. But I think what I also hear you say, and have heard you say a few times also, Chief Escalante, is, you know, the policy direction to support public safety. And I think what I'm hearing, and I'd love to hear from Chief Odie as well, in terms of how can this committee be supportive of the work you're doing in these very specific areas of public safety, in terms of policy support and direction. And you don't have to, if you have an answer now, great. But if not, it could be something that you share back to us. But it'd be helpful for us to hear from you all what role we can play. And you did just specifically in that example with not getting in the weeds of it, but essentially looking at the broader outcome. But if there's other areas, that would be helpful for us to know.
Yeah, I mean, I could think of just a few things right off the bat. It's, again, higher level where it's, and not knowing exactly the history of this committee and how involved they've gotten, but are there conversations that you can have at the district attorney's level, right, about accountability, at the judge's level about accountability, at the probation and parole level about services and programming when people get out of incarceration to help them be more successful than just land them in our city streets. Those are more of the higher level, talking to, like, we're in a huge situation with behavioral health and mental health services in our community. And so you could do one of two things. We could focus on the criminalization and either arrest, citation, or have them rotate in and out of telecare endlessly versus, the need for funding, if it's pursuing grants, to help these sort of services along to have more programs to be more successful and more solution focused versus let's just criminalize the behavior. That there's certainly a role for that. Don't get me wrong. There's a time and a place that's what you have to do. But sometimes that just kind of, it gets repetitive.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I agree with the perspective around more movement. And if this committee can be helpful in drafting language or writing letters. And, right now we have a supervisor to be on this committee that hopefully will be an ally and advocate at the county level as we think about looking to them. What we know is that a lot of this stuff with the needles, with the criminal justice system and recidivism, the revolving door, all of it is way bigger than what we can handle at the city level. So having those conversations is essential to get to what I think the ultimate paradigm shift we want to see. So yeah, I really appreciate that perspective, and also happy to hear from you, Chief Odie, if you want to weigh in too. I know.
Yeah, no, I don't. A lot of the comments that were made in terms of these items in the 6-month work plan are all great and appropriate. The one that sort of resonates with me is truly the conversation around defining public safety and really what the community wants and what council wants from myself and Chief Escalante. For the fire side, our big focus, it sort of dovetails into Chief Escalante's point about, is it always the punitive side or is there a prevention or proactive side? And so we do that a lot on the fire side with our FireWise community groups and public education. And so how the fire department fits in those conversations would be helpful. And I know in the open space conversation, I work closely, or my staff works closely with a lot of the PD staff on those. And so I'm very interested in that piece as well, because there is a fire safety component there. And then lastly, one thing that Chief Escalante touched on, and it's a challenge for us, and it's working with, the DA, when it talks about arson, we talk about trying to, file these cases and bring charges for anybody who's negligent burning in open spaces or just throughout the city itself. And so that is a challenge for both us and Chief Escalante's staff that assist us in these investigations. So having this group be an arm and an advocate in that arena would be extremely helpful, because it is a challenge where we'll go to court and try and make sure that these people are registered as arsonists, so that it makes our job easier on the back end, but also make sure that we are bringing them to justice and making sure that, there's payment for damages and whatnot. But it's difficult because a lot of times these things get thrown out, as Chief Escalante knows. And so, of course, the community is asking for us to do more, but our hands are somewhat tied. And I think also to that level, in referring to Councilmember Cummings going to the board, I think in the future, advocating through county agencies such as OR3 and the Board of Supervisors as a whole to sort of get us in line. We're having some challenges just with OR3 on a variety of different subjects. So I think that's just my perspective as the fire chief, but I think there's a lot that I do and my staff does with PD moving forward. But I think defining public safety moving forward would be helpful. And then a lot of the proactive, preventative stuff. And then where I fit into that, I want to be a part of it wherever I can. So does that make sense?
Totally.
Okay.
And I really love that. That was something that I know other communities have done, have really looked at. I think when people are asked what public safety is, they think of many different things. And and many of which are on the policy topics we've discussed, as well as beyond in terms of fire prevention and other types of preventative tools and mental health services and behavioral health needs and, accountability where appropriate accountability and such like that. So, maybe that could be a component of the strategic planning process, which is a larger conversation and I think a broader initiative for the city as a whole, but naturally tied to this group as well, while simultaneously maybe looking at seeing some movement with some of the specific things if council members are sort of feeling like going in that direction as well. I mean, one thing is to have a meeting with some of these folks that you've brought up to understand what's happening and what their perspective is. And, I'd like to know. I mean, I think an arsonist for me, obviously poses a serious threat to our community as an entire region and whole. So why is that not happening? I don't know, but I would like to know. And I think the community should know. So, even if that's this group setting up conversations with some of these key players, that could be a tangible next step as well, specific to some of the things you both brought up. I welcome anybody else's thoughts, or Em, if you have any thoughts as well. Justin, are you gonna fix this for us when you go into the county?
That's what I was thinking. I was like, well,
A lot of great feedback. I'll be interested to talk to you all.
We'll send them over to you.
All right.
Councilmember Watkins, just to sort of dovetail under your comment or the discussion around what is public safety, it's somewhat subjective, right? For myself, for Chief Escalante, we even have two different perspectives at times, as well as anybody in the community. And, there are times, again, my limited experience with this group, Chief Heidi had me as a presenter a number of times. And a lot of times I'm just doing, the stats or the annual report, which is great. And I think it informs, the city council, this group, and then of course the community. But I also, I find that sometimes it's hyper focused on the law enforcement side. And again, when we define or discuss what is public safety, I think we will find, things like wildfire resiliency or fire safety, or this issue of arsonists and why we can't put some of them, deal with them effectively from a legal standpoint. So I just want to make sure it's not all on Chief Escalante's shoulders, but, public safety has multiple facets to it. And so I just want to make sure that,
Totally.
I'm doing my part to be proactive as part of this group.
I think honestly, it's everybody. It's beyond your division. It's the Parks and Rec department. It's Public Works. It's all of the city as a whole. So I think having that conversation as a community to understand when we're talking about public safety, we're talking about similar things, or when we're talking about public safety as a committee, this is how we're defining it because of what you were describing in terms of the various perspectives. And I don't think there's community examples. We started this process with the prior staff, two prior staff people before. So it was something that we were starting a conversation about. So I think there are resources available for us to look at to see how other communities have gone in this direction. But I think it will help us be on the same page in regards to clarity and definition and community values, as well as just the collective responsibility. And then hopefully very specific policy actions and policy supports for your divisions to achieve those goals in alignment with our values for how we define it. So that would be my thoughts. But yeah, totally. I think we're all a very similar page here in terms of what that could look like. And go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask if we wanted to take it out to public comment and then any direction we want to provide after that.
Sure. Are there any other questions or any things we want to discuss before we do that? No? Okay. Great suggestion. And if any member of the community wants to speak to this item, please do so by raising your hand. I don't have the instructions in front of me, Em. I think it's, *6 to raise your hand?
I don't see any hands raised.
Okay. We are two attendees here. I'll give it a few minutes. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and bring it back. I know the item before us today is to kind of discuss the work plan And, you know, one thing I'd say is to think about the public safety definition and move forward with that as a component or priority area for the strategic plan and how we define that, and then see how some of my colleagues feel about any other next steps.
So I'm going to shift the document real quick.
Sure.
So this is pretty much what we went over earlier, and I just kind of want to clean up those, priorities. What I am hearing is, let's see here. List. So restorative justice pilot program we're going to be removing, correct? Okay, so I see nods, so I'll just out so we can clean that up. And then also the surveillance ordinance. Okay. All right. So the hope is, what it sounds like is I do hear a lot on item number 1, and I'll clean up the sheet. So it looks like number 2 and number 7 is the same thing. And number 3. So really the number 1, 2, and 3 is what I'm hearing most from the members as well as staff. Is that correct?
Does that reflect
For like the priorities?
priorities for the next sort of few months moving forward? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think like staff recommendation is.
Well, the X and cross it off. I see what you're saying.
Yeah. And the hope really is to kind of do a little bit more of an analysis on these 3 items and actually put it down on like a timeline so we could visually see what those progress and milestones are. That's an idea for the future. Oh, Councilmember Golder.
Well, I was just going to say, we did talk about some fire. I forgot what it was. Gosh darn it. Someone's texting me. Sorry, I don't know how to turn that off. Stupid family. They're not stupid. They're lovely family, but they get a weird group chat. We talked about something with, and maybe Haidu, he put it on there, but maybe Odie, you remember it was, I don't know, it was on another page, but there was something about fire that we talked about, and I don't remember when it was. Doesn't.
Let's see here.
It's
was
not
like,
ringing a bell unless it has to do with like, fire-wise or like wildfire resiliency. I mean, those
fire resiliency. That's what it was.
Okay.
It was on there at some. I swear it was on there at some point, like or something along those. Wasn't there? Am I crazy?
No, it's true. Yeah, there
was something I remember.
And it would be more wildfire resiliency specifically.
Okay, I think that's what it was. I don't remember, but I just if we could have something on there in regards to fire, just because you said that, and because I thought we talked about it.
Share.
And I think the defining public safety,
This one.
if we can have like that, I don't know what the best next like policy direction is for that, other than to see how we can move forward with a process for that and how it could potentially align with the strategic plan. So if that's a request, or if it's bringing it back to the council, or in terms of a next step.
Yeah, that would be a request so that we could bring this back and have a discussion with staff on what that would look like.
And then return maybe to the committee, and we could formulate a recommendation for the full council for consideration. That would be a great, I think, path.
And if I could just maybe ask one thing, it's like, and this is kind of based on the conversation we've had here, then maybe the categories around the hypodermic needles and the bike, like shop areas, that those are maybe broader, and so maybe it's like needle litter, and then for the bike issue, bike theft in general, rather than it being bike shops. Because to what Chief Escalante was saying, it sounds like there's a lot of prevention that can be discussed, and like how we can better get people to register. Are there ways that people can put tracking devices in their bikes, but really getting to that prevention issue. And then with needle litter, it sounds like there's also a lot around there. It's not just the sensitive areas, it's needle litter as a whole, broadly. So maybe having those be kind of more general topics, and then wildfire resiliency, so that there's 3 broad topics, not something that kind of is really specific to just chop shops and needle litter and sensitive areas and things like that.
Go ahead, Chief. I see you.
I was just going to make a comment, and again, forgive me, I'm still learning the role of all of the committee here. One of the things that comes to mind when we talk about needles is, I mean, I'm a big advocate that unless you have a medical purpose, there shouldn't be any hypodermic needles in our parks or our beaches, period. I mean, that's just, but maybe does this committee take it a little bit broader, like Justin's talking about, and then they take it to the level of working with the county to get more canisters for people to properly dispose of the needles? Do they go another level and work with the Harm Reduction Coalition and talk about where they're distributing and how they can be maybe contributing to the problem or not? Just a thought, is that part of your role, or is that beyond your scope, I guess? Those are the different layers that Justin's talking about to take it to kind of a different level of, we can have an ordinance that criminalizes it, but do we also work on all the other measures to hopefully prevent the criminalization of it, and we educate people and give them other options, so when we do the enforcement, we know that they had a choice.
Definitely the latter, I'd say. And I think you bring up a bigger point around, a lot of these things as sort of a both and, right? This is like the spectrum of it all. And there's the enforcement, there's the prevention, there's the intervention, there's the partnership. So I think how we're holistically looking at these issues in terms of also the understanding of where the biggest problem is. So we're really focused in that way too. So I think a lot of conversations, as you mentioned, with the county, with the DA, with the courts, to really understand what is going on and what the challenges are, what role we can play, what we can do to prevent, and then where we can partner to see the big change, the behavior change that we hope to see. Go ahead.
And I was going to say, to add to that, and what Bernie, you were bringing up, I think another part of this direction should be to have that conversation around what is the role of this group, and then get some approval of that by the city council, so that because to Bernie's point, is it the role to just make recommendations for ordinances, or should this group be going out and speaking with other organizations that are doing a lot of this work? And so I think that was kind of one of the things we started off talking about, was with all the changes being made, there is an opportunity for us to clearly define the role of this group, and to not lose sight of that if we can provide that, and the recommendations that can come back to this group. It can be incorporated into the strategic planning process. And if that discussion can be had with Matt or the people who are working on that strategic planning process, it kind of help inform when that comes back to this group in the next year, kind of what those recommendations are in terms of what the role could be. So.
One thing also, Chief Escalante, is I think a difference in style between you and our former chief is that Chief Mills wanted the council to work on specific ordinances. I felt like that he was requesting that. That was something that he often said, I don't have a real ordinance for that. I need a tool for that. And so what I'm hearing from you is more of an interest in kind of a preventative, more broader policy support role that we could play. And that's helpful to know, because I think that is also why there was really more nuanced requests within this public safety committee, because it was like, I can't do it unless you give me an ordinance for that. But if that's not necessarily the case, to Councilmember Boulder's point earlier, then, where can we find a way to support the work broadly, support you and the team as well? And so just sort of a little bit of a context there.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm still trying to figure out, do I receive direction from the committee that says, hey, go write an ordinance, we're tired of this and we want this enforced? Or do I, just report out on status updates, crime updates, staffing updates, budgeting, all of those sort of things? Or is the committee kind of going out and more proactively trying to address things at a higher policy level? And I don't know the answer to that. I've been asking him, actually. I'm like, Em, what are we doing? Like, what's our purpose here? And so, anyways.
No, I appreciate that. And I kind of heard that we're interested in wanting to do a deeper dive with the redefining public safety, kind of interested in knowing about some of those specific policy directions or ordinances, or not ordinances per se, but ultimately kind of attention to those two areas of hyperthermic, is it? Now I'm like mispronouncing the name. I don't have it in front of me. Hypodermic needles, excuse me, hypodermic needles, as well as some of the bike stuff. And if it's not a approach of penalty, then is it a approach of prevention? And as we understand more, then I think we can go back to the full council with, a recommendation or some sort of next step. But those are sort of the three areas that, if I'm sort of taking from this conversation, are kind of where we want to go, as well as the partnerships. I don't want to overlook that with the, hearing about the DA's, what's happening with the DA in the county and the courts. Does that capture it? And does that capture what you need? And you and I can meet in advance to kind of go through this all to plan for the next meeting too.
Yep. This sounds good. Thank you.
So I know we had it as a general business item. I don't know if you need a motion. I don't know no. Okay. Does everybody feel complete in the discussion at this point? I see heads nodding. Okay, great. Do you feel complete with what you need, Em, again, just to make sure for clarity? Okay, great.
Thank you.
Well, if that's the only item, unless there's anything else that we want to bring up, and Chief Escalante, please.
Sorry to keep you. I just wanted to thank Justin for his time on this committee. I know for the last several years he's put a lot of effort and energy into our community around public safety, and I wish him the best. And thanks for all your work, Justin.
Yeah, thank you.
And you're going to solve all the problems now, right? All the things that you said that's the county's problem is now your problem.
Yeah, it's true. Thank you for that, Chief Escalante. It's definitely been an area of interest and focus of yours, Justin. So thank you for your work for these past several years.
No problem.
Wishing you the best. Mm-hmm. All right.
Well.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. So I think that concludes it. I don't know if we have any information items, but other than that, I think we're concluded for our public safety meeting. I want to thank you all for your energy and time and thought today. It was really a great conversation and helpful moving forward.
All right.
Thanks, Em.
Thank you.
Good evening,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Okay.
Have a great night. Bye.